This story happened a year ago. I was living with my then boyfriend, now fiance. Anyways, we lived in a townhouse in the suburbs. Pretty safe area. There had been some robberies a couple blocks away, but they weren't common, and I felt pretty safe walking home alone at night. So one weekend, my boyfriend's brother Marshall and his girlfriend Amy and her brother Curtis were visiting. We were all just gonna chill and have a couple of drinks and play video games and relax. My boyfriend had his LSATs, and after a couple of months of studying, he wanted to just relax before the exam. Unfortunately, I ended up getting very sick. It was the worst flu I've ever had. Extreme fever, 1 degree higher than I would have had to go to the hospital. I had nausea, headache, body aches, and all that good stuff. Of course, I didn't want that to stop my friends from having a good time, so they came over anyways, and I just stayed in my room. They went out to eat before they came over, so I was in bed alone watching TV. Felt like I was dying. I slept on and off. About 4 p.m. I heard the door open and figured they were back, but when I called out for my boyfriend, no one came up. Even if he was there, he probably wouldn't have heard me, but I knew he would come and check on me as soon as he came back. So I assumed I heard something fall, or the neighbors making noises, so I dismissed it and went back to sleep. I was in a deep sleep and groggily opened my eyes and thought I saw a figure move across my room. I was so heavily medicated and so sick I didn't fully understand what had happened and what that meant. Like I saw a figure, but it didn't connect in my brain that I might have seen someone since it was pretty dark in my room. I think part of me thought it was just the TV. Finally, around 7 p.m. everyone comes back. They were loud. Amy, my boyfriend's brother's girlfriend, was tipsy. She's very fun when she's drunk, so there's a lot of laughter. My boyfriend comes in to check on me. He brought me some soup. He sat and talked about his day as I ate. I asked him to look in the basket under the bed to get a new bottle of aspirin. We had a full-size bed, and I had a basket under the bed where I kept extra pill bottles, shaving cream, and stuff like that. I didn't know right away, but thank God he looked under the bed. He put his head up and handed me the aspirin, but his facial expression had changed, like he had lost color in his face. I didn't think much of it and said thank you. Come on, I'm gonna take you to the bathroom. He never stutters like that, but I remember picking up on it. I told him no, I didn't really have to pee, and I didn't feel like getting up. He said, no, let's go. I don't want to have to climb up the stairs just because you need to pee in 10 minutes. I remember feeling hurt by his words, but I knew he was right since I just had soup and half a bottle of water. He walked me downstairs, and I couldn't understand why he didn't just use the upstairs bathroom. I think I was so sick, I felt too exhausted to question. He sat me down on the couch. What's going on? I practically whispered this. He took out his phone, and his hand was shaking. I asked him what was wrong, and I'll never forget how my heart sank, and I felt like I couldn't breathe when he whispered, there's someone under the bed. Amy laughed, so I laughed, thinking it was a prank, but it felt serious. My boyfriend's brother suggested we get out of the house, so we did. As we were leaving, we heard a thud upstairs. We quickly left and drove away, then called the police. The police came and searched the house and didn't find anyone. He must have known we suspected he was there and left. My boyfriend couldn't give a description, he only saw sneakers. But it was so dark he couldn't really see anything. The scariest thing still leaves me on edge that the police found a knife under the bed. It was a small steak knife, but very dull and rusty. There weren't any killings in the area, so my friends assumed he just wanted a place to sleep. I'm not really sure how he got into our place, but I have some theories. I'm really proud of how my boyfriend handled everything. He's a calm and collected person, but I always assumed he wouldn't be that way in a crisis. I just hope I never see this person again. Ever. Do you know that a person can survive without water for only 3 days, but Gandhi was able to survive as much as 21 days without food? Those are the things I used to know as a normal student in a small town. I know none of those things anymore. I just know about rage and feeling constantly hungry. I was in my last year of high school and working a part-time job so I could save up money for higher education. Things were dull, but mostly fine until an otherwise normal afternoon after classes. It happened in the light of day. I was shoved inside a vehicle with expertise. I never saw the faces of the men that took me. I never saw their vans stinking of old blood and rancid food. I could only see the blackness of my blindfold. and a taste of slight sweetness of the chloroform before I lost my senses. When I woke up again, I was completely naked in a poorly lit room. The state I was in, it made me expect the worst, but there was no pain or bleeding indicating that kind of violence. It was cold, and there was a maddening dripping sound. Something was gleaming in the dark. As soon as I adjusted my eyes, I realized it was a knife. Drip, drip, drip. The small room had nothing but an already dirty toilet. The knife in the crack in the ceiling, dripping slimy, slightly green water. The walls and floors were gray and featureless. A very strong light, like a camera flash, popped in my face, blinding all my senses with a shock. It disappeared after a moment, and I heard a voice. "We want to watch your suicide. Let's see how long it will take." It took someone unremarkable, frail, with nothing left to live for. But I know I had a purpose. I had to frustrate my captors. If they wanted to watch my suicide, I would have to be the most resilient person in the world. I wouldn't grant their wish. Back then, I didn't know I was being watched by a bunch of sick, twisted people who kept up with the daily misery in the comfort of their own homes and their anonymousness. I slept on the cold, hard floor. Food never came. The only source of water was the murky leak in the ceiling. I drank it, humiliated. It tasted worse than shit, and I would know that since I fed on my own waste during the first few days. The only indication that the day had ended was a blinding flash and the same cold, mocking voice telling me that they were surprised I made it this far. I was so hungry, so hungry. The room was getting hotter from my breathing every day. There was no proper ventilation. It seemed to be just enough to not let me die from carbon monoxide poisoning, a merciful death compared to the one they planned for me. I didn't know why they chose me. I still don't know. I never wronged anyone. I never excelled at anything to be a target of someone's envy. It was just a pointless act of evil. The fact that it was completely random made the hatred grow and, with it, my determination. My stomach hurt beyond words. I was constantly sick from the putrid smells all around me. My body ached all over. My skin was matted and flaky, my hair falling out from malnutrition. I grabbed the knife. I felt watched in cruel anticipation. Not today. I chopped off my left pinky and shoved it in my mouth before I could think too much about it. My own blood dripped down my chest as I chewed on my own bones. The crunchy sound should have been so sickening. My teeth should have been hurting so much, or even breaking, bone against bone. I should have been horrified to defile a part of my own body, but I was just so happy to be eating. After that, I felt my body grow stronger every day. Like a member of the cannibal tribe on Papua New Guinea after ritualistically feeding on the departed loved ones. I laughed manically for hours at a time and trembled endlessly. But I was alive more than I have been in that captivity. I rationed my food and body waste. I needed my right hand, so it would be crucial to spare at least 4 fingers on it. But I was free to feed on my left hand. My toes were pretty much useless. I've been dragging myself on the floor to move anyway, but I didn't need to feed on myself for long. No more than a week after I first took a bite of myself, the voice after the blinding flash had something else to say. "We're selling you." The official story is that I miraculously escaped my perpetrators during their flawed operation to move me to my new owner. And by the time I reached a neighbor and the police were called, they had already fled the crime scene. The investigation was kept very quiet, so it didn't make world news. Hell, I only made the local news as local teenager mutilated by unknown man. Someone even donated me a prosthetic hand. The police were able to take down the website where my daily torture was being streamed non-stop, and just then I found out that I was a star. I laughed for days because everyone felt so bad for me, not knowing that the torture I endured was way beyond losing a hand or a few toes. I laughed for days because I know the truth and no one else does. I know how. Right when they opened the door to my prison, my body felt like it was possessed by a bestial creature, and before I know it, I used my superhuman strength to crush the bones of 5 men all at once. Then I ate their flesh, corpse as well. I even licked the leftover blood from the walls before I opened the doors and headed to the closest house, dragging my bad foot. In that moment, I felt like I was the co-pilot of my body. The wheelsman was a voice screaming, "Kill and devour." I could have never escaped if something hadn't taken a hold of me. I'm not strong or even fast. I'd do anything to spend the rest of my life quietly, having my body, mind, and soul heal and recover from a devastating trauma. The problem is that eating raw flesh of my captors was the most pleasant experience I've ever had in my life. And while I've been chasing mercilessly all the monsters that watched me suffer for their own enjoyment, I'm too hungry. Their tainted flesh has not been enough for me. No, for us. So let's go back all the way to the mid-80s. We lived in the suburbs in a close-knit community, so I never had any worries. 11-year-old me was home alone during summer break from school. My mom and dad both worked, so I was just chilling in the living room, blasting the stereo with the front door open. Bit of backstory. My cousin was dating a guy named Jeff. They are now married with kids. Me and him hit it off instantly. He was a few years older than me, but would treat me like a little brother, so we talked shit and pestered each other quite a bit. At this time, we were fairly new in our friendship, but he would call to check up on me. The phone rings. At this time, we didn't have fancy things like cell phones or even caller ID. We had a push-button phone, which we had just bought to replace the old-school rotary dial phone not too long before then. The conversation goes like this. "Hello? Hey, what's going on?" I'm thinking, cool, it's Jeff. Nothing, just hanging around the house. Are your parents home? Jeff knew my parents worked, but maybe he thought they were off that day. No, they're both at work. Oh, okay, so what are you wearing? This was odd, but this would be something Jeff would say to mess with me. T-shirt and shorts? Are you wearing underwear? What kind? It dawns on me, this is not Jeff. He sounded like him, but holy shit, it's not him. Who is this? David. David who? David Sanders. Who the hell is David Sanders? What do you want? Just wanted to talk to you. Yeah, I have to go. Okay, see you soon. End of the phone call. At that point my mind was racing. I had no idea what just happened. I just talked to a dude that I didn't know for 5 minutes and told him that my parents weren't home and what I was wearing. Wait, did he just say talk to you soon? What the hell? Okay, I've heard of prank calls before. Someone was just calling random people and screwing with them. Yeah, that's what it must have been. So for about 20 minutes or so, I'm roaming around the house with the door open blasting music, trying to shake off the call. My mind is repeating the last line. See you soon. There is no way he could have been serious, right? Okay, let's go ahead and shut and lock the door, just to be sure. 3 minutes later, I walk to the front door, and without opening it, I ask through the door, "Who is it?" He replies, "It's David." No effing way. I step to the window by the door and peek out. Sure enough, there's this guy in his mid-20s looking back at me, smiling, and he gives me a quick wave. I can't believe this is happening. This cannot be happening. What do you want? Just wanted to hang out with you. My mind is blank. What do I say? What do I do? My dad is home. He's in the bathroom. What the hell? That's the best I could come up with? Oh, okay. Bye. No way this can be that easy. Nope. I see the doorknob turn. This creep is trying to get in. Luckily, it's locked. I wait a few seconds and look out the window. No one's there. Wait, what was that? I hear someone in the bushes right in front of the bathroom. I run in there, and this guy's standing, trying to open the window. He tries the next one, and it is locked as well. Adult me would have called 911 as soon as he showed up, and talked to him through the door until the police showed up. But 11-year-old me? I called my mom. After that, my parents set up a system. They would call, let it ring, hang up, and then call again. And of course, I don't leave the door open anymore. I never heard from David again, though when I was older, I'm sure I would have liked to, and explained to him why he shouldn't be trying to pick up young boys. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I live in Michigan. I was 16 years old when these events happened. I'm a huge athletic nerd, and I go hiking every day unless I feel lazy. I picked the wrong day to go once, and I met and experienced something that I don't want to experience ever again. I drove to the hiking trail that I go to just about every time I go hiking. And on this day I saw a creepy guy that looked like he was in his mid-30s. But me being stubborn and hard-headed as I was back then, I ignored my gut feeling and went and started jogging around the trail. I took a short glance at him and started going down the trail. I got about 200 to 300 yards from the entrance and took a short break until I heard a scream of what sounded like a man. And I looked down the path and my heart dropped. I saw the guy running straight towards me. As my adrenaline rushed into me, I started to run as fast as I could. This guy was running so fast and he was catching up with me, and I was a really fast runner. This guy ran like he had taken 2 shots of steroids. As I started to cry in panic, I took a sharp turn into the woods and started to run back to the parking lot area. I kept hearing footsteps not far behind me, but they began to get slower as I got closer and closer to the parking lot. At last I made it to the parking lot, and I cried tears of joy as I took out my phone to call the cops. Not long after they arrived, they searched and found the man. He was a homeless guy, 37 years old. They said they found a butcher knife in his coat pocket. To this day, I'm glad I did ROTC throughout high school, or else I wouldn't have had the energy. Creepy manic homeless guy, let's never meet again. It happened 5 years ago. The official ruling was that his death was caused by a rogue bear attack. You know, when bears get a little too used to human food, so it doesn't feel threatened anymore and attacks a human. They all know it wasn't a bear though. Bears don't leave wounds like that, and they sure as hell don't pose the body 70 feet up a dead tree. Yeah, I said pose. But before I get into details, I should explain a bit about myself now. I'm a park ranger in a popular national park in the northern United States. I don't want to say exactly which one, although I doubt I'm going to keep my job much longer anyway. That's partially why I'm posting this. I need to tell someone else about the story. And like I said, my colleagues don't want to talk about it. Being a park ranger has given me a lot of weird stories, and everyone is used to weird shit happening in the woods, but this is on a completely different level. For days we've been getting reports from campers and hikers about strange noises coming from a section of deep backcountry forest. Growls, yipping, and even human-sounding voices. Equipment and food had been going missing from the backcountry campgrounds. All pretty typical stuff can be explained away pretty easily. Many animals steal food, make weird noises, and even the human voices can be explained by the sounds that foxes and mountain lions make at night. But we needed to investigate either way, because an animal that is conditioned to human food is dangerous. So we set our veteran backcountry ranger, Craig McKay. This guy had been working there for 30 years, was an expert outdoorsman, and was my mentor when I first started. As always, he jumped into the task, always eager to go into the backcountry, even though he was getting older. I'll pause now and let Craig tell you the rest of the story. Well, his journal will have to tell us the rest, because he isn't alive to tell it. I found his journal, a flashlight, and his backpack inside a small cave near the location of his body. A couple days after he didn't return, we sent out a search party to find him. I haven't shared his journal with anyone, not even the other rangers, until now. I'm not exactly sure why I've kept it hidden, other than the truth seems so messed up and unreal. I didn't want to damage people's memory of Craig. I'm not even sure if I believe it myself. Everything below is what he had written down over the 2 days he was out in the backcountry. October 21st, 2011, Day 1. Today was a long day. I can't say I've made much progress. I've hiked about 15 miles over the course of the day, starting down the gully where the reports first started, and ended up at my current camp, which is on the southwest side of Bald Knob. I figured it was a good enough place to keep an eye on anything coming and going through the valley. Earlier I found some tracks on the ground in the area, and as close as I can tell, they're from a mountain goat. Odd that he would travel alone, but maybe he got separated from the herd, or dying. I followed them for a while, but they didn't lead me anywhere, so I abandoned them. Near the tracks was a pervasive smell of death, and I'm assuming that the goat that got separated died. Tomorrow I'm planning a hike across the valley to the mountain on the opposite side, and see if I can catch tracks of whatever is harassing the campers. October 22nd, 2011, morning of day 2. Quick note when I eat breakfast. Last night was a long night, one of the longest I've had in a while. About an hour after going to bed, I heard light steps near the campsite. I grabbed a rifle and went out to investigate. No lights so my eyes could stay adjusted to the dark. The second I stepped out of the tent, the noise stopped. Whatever was there knew I was watching. I made a couple of circles around the campsite and found nothing, but I could feel something watching me from the shadows. As I got back into the tent, I saw a tall silhouette in the clearing, but I must have been seeing things. It was too skinny to be a bear, and nothing else is that tall. The strong scent of death was still present and kept me weary all night. Tonight's mission has changed. I just got a radio call that a couple of hikers have not returned when they were supposed to last night, and they might be lost. I'm still crossing the valley today, but this time to reach where the hikers were supposed to be last. October 22nd, 2011, night of day 2. Stopped for the night in the valley. Cooking dinner now. Chicken and rice again. Dead tired. I'm getting too old for this. No progress on the hikers. Still smells like death, though much stronger than before. I just heard some sounds that sound like they could be voices. Can't get the radio to work in this valley. Looks like I'm not getting dinner tonight, after all. Going to take a light pack to see if I can find the voices. Night of day 2, second entry scribbled further down the page. Dear God, what did I find? Barely made it into this cave. I can hear scratching and growling outside. Going to try to block the entrance and see if I can stay here overnight. I found out where the smell of death came from. Update. Got the cave entrance crack covered with a large rock and some brush. It will have to do. The beast is still outside. Don't think I'll sleep tonight anyway. Not after what I saw. I might as well record this, because these might be my last words. For the first time in my career I'm scared. I don't even know what I saw. It was huge, about 7.5 feet, impossibly fast. Smells of putrid meat. Earlier when I had left the camp, the voices outside became more and more persistent. They were definitely human voices. I followed them until I reached the clearing, and suddenly everything went silent. No voices, no hikers. It sounded like the forest was holding its breath. I heard a slight sound behind me before I was thrown off my feet, knocked the wind out of me. My rifle was ripped from my hands before I could use it. I was picked up by my legs and thrown across the clearing. I could feel its claws dig like knives into my muscle. The thing dragged me upright against a tree, and I could feel its breath on my neck, breathing out that putrid smell. I could feel the blood pouring from my leg and soaking into my pants. The agonizing pain from the wound left me trembling. I could feel the weight of its body as it pushed against me, ready to go in for the kill. I heard the smack of its mouth opening, and I prepared myself to die when a crash in the distance distracted the beast long enough for me to make a break for it. I ran for my life. I didn't look back, but I knew it wasn't far behind me. About 20 feet away was the entry of this cave, and I was able to squeeze into it. It's still outside. I can hear it shuffling around, trying to get into the crack. I can hear its heavy breathing, the sucking, gasping sound coming from its mouth. I have no idea what I'm gonna do. Dear God, please help me out of this. I want to see my wife again. I want to see my kids again. My nose is filled with that putrid smell of impending death. If I make it through this night, my plan is to wait until the first light and try to escape back to the ranger station. Those were the last words we have by Craig McKay. When he never reported back, we assumed that his radio had gone out of range, but after a couple days, we sent out a search party for him. Well, we found him alright. From the tracks, it looks like Craig left the cave early that next day. He made it about 50 feet from the cave's entrance when a second set of tracks catch up to him. Goat tracks. More specifically, a goat with only 2 legs. The gait matches something that would be a bit more than 7 feet, like Craig described in his journal. What we found of Craig was dragged 70 feet up a nearby tree and torn into pieces. He was hardly recognizable. His torso was jammed onto a short branch of the tree that kept him hanging there. His arms splayed out to his sides. His innards were strewn around the base of the tree. The jagged, shattered remains of his leg bones stuck out of the early snowfall that had come to the mountains this year. Nothing appeared to be eaten or missing, but not a single piece of him was left untouched by the monster. It took the rest of the day and a special rope team to get him down. The missing hikers were never found, though scrapes of clothing matching what they were wearing have been found in the same valley that Craig died. Like I said earlier, the official story is a bear attack, but bears don't do this. We don't know what did this. We've since rerouted trails to stay away from this area, but we still hear reports of human-sounding voices coming from the woods, and we've had more hikers than normal go missing in the last 5 years. Some are found, but it's always too late. Some are arranged like Craig was, broken warnings to other hikers who dare to intrude upon the beast forest. Some are just never seen again. The best thing we have to go off of is this photo that we got from a cell phone near one of the hikers' bags. Growing up in central US, I've heard all the myths and legends about skinwalkers. I never really gave them any merit up until last week. I also heard that talking about them or thinking about them can draw them. But I need to tell someone, anyone that would listen, and not think that I'm crazy. Let me start with some background. My name is Dakota. I am 26 and have grown up in and around the Southern Rockies and the Superstition Mountains. All my life I've been drawn to the outdoors. Hiking, camping, biking, rafting, kayaking. You name it, I've done it. I'm very experienced in all these activities, and have worked as a guide and a survival instructor since the age of 19. I've experienced many strange and possibly paranormal things during my time in the wild, but I'm rambling. Anyway, last Friday I took some time off for myself, just to get back in tune with the solitude of nature. I packed all my gear, finished going through my checklist, and made sure to let some other guides know where I was headed to, and that I would be back a few days later. I loaded my gear into my four-wheeler, made sure that Bear, my very large, very loyal, very protective German Shepherd, was comfy in the passenger seat. He is my lookout, adventure partner, and best friend. He never leaves my side, even to the point that all the small businesses around the long-forgotten mining town I call home welcome him happily. We set out shortly after 11 a.m. towards a canyon I recently discovered hidden away behind thick brush and an apparent rock slide. After about 5 hours driving through the dusty and desolate landscape, the trail continues on between a narrow passage through the mountainous cliffs. When we arrived, I parked the four-wheeler behind a large outcropping of boulders, took the keys, and covered it up. Not that I was worried about theft. I was probably miles away from the nearest human. I covered it up to keep it out of the unforgiving sun and to prevent any melting damage. After getting my four-wheeler stashed away, I drawn my pack and my sidearm, which was a large caliber Desert Eagle. There weren't many animals out here, but I like guns and target shooting, so who cares if it's overkill? It's the last means of protection, and it will do the job. I surveyed the area. There was thick brush and dry foliage all around us, with a small foot trail I cleared from the four-wheeler at the rear, and a large rock pile in front of us, with sheer cliffs on either side. I skirted around the rocks to a very narrow passage, in behind on the left side. It was a tight squeeze, and I had to remove my pack and pull it behind me. I had to side shuffle like this for about 20 feet, with cold jagged rocks against my chest and loose boulders against my back. The trail narrowed near the end, and I had to suck in my chest and wiggle my way out into the larger opening in the rocks, with Bear waiting happily for me, with his head cocked to the side, with a confused look on his face, almost wondering why I was struggling when he passed so easily. When I finally freed myself from the narrow crevice, I looked around and my jaw dropped. All around me the cliff walls were covered with ancient cave paintings and carvings, some of which I recognized from some of the other Native American sites used as religious sites, but many of the symbols were new to me. The most notable was a large painting near where the trail continued on. It depicted a large figure whose head and antlers resembled that of a deer, but body was long and narrow. And strangest of all, it's at times like this that I wish that I brought some piece of technology, such as a camera or iPhone, but I usually leave them at home and only bring an emergency sat phone. Intrigued, I left the opening and headed down the trail. I was surprised by the steep downward slope that seemed to be heading down further and further into the earth, and I was even more surprised when the trail ended at the mouth of a large cave, a cave I didn't know about. This couldn't get any better. I set down my pack and pulled out my flashlight. It was getting pretty dark, so I figured I'd just check out the opening and then get settled in for the night. I wandered in a few feet and abruptly stopped when the floor dropped down into a chasm. My flashlight barely penetrated the dark abyss below me. Disappointed that I needed to return another day with my cave gear and possibly another partner, I headed back towards the mouth of the cave, and Bear, who strangely stayed put, and did not follow me in. He must have got tired, I thought, as I suddenly started to realize my own fatigue after 5 hours of driving and nearly 4 hours of hiking. I started a small fire with some light newspaper logs, in which burned surprisingly for a long time, heated up some water for a dehydrated omelet, and gave Bear his bag of kibble. After a not quite so satisfying meal, I unrolled my sleeping bag and got comfortable, with a fire by my side, and a decent view of the stars peeking between the distant cliff tops that sheltered me from the rest of the world. With a peaceful thought, I dozed off to the sound of the crackling fire and Bear snoring beside me. I sleepily checked my watch when I was nudged awake. It was almost 3 a.m. in the morning. I softly pushed Bear's head away from nudging me so I could go back to sleep. But that's when, in the dim firelight, I saw his teeth and his head low beside me, in a very protective position. He was staring towards the mouth of the cave, with a deep guttural growl emanating from his throat. More alert now, I clumsily grabbed for my flashlight and unholstered my pistol, my fingers ready to switch off the safety. I motioned to Bear to be quiet, which was a very handy skill that had taken him a long time to learn. On command, he quieted, but still snarled, staring at the dark hole in the cliff. I illuminated the edge of the drop-off, my gun aimed with the beam, and we listened. For a few minutes, all I heard was silence besides my heartbeat. Then, faintly I heard it. I still can't describe it, but I will try my best. It sounded like the bleat of a goat and the sound of a wildcat coming together to form words that seemed so broken and foreign. Quiet at first, it was accompanied by crackling and scraping sounds, getting closer and closer. I strained my eyes to see the edge of the beam of light. What I saw next, I'm sure will be burned into my mind, and I will never forget it. In the light, long rotten fingers with thick black claws curled around the lip and proceeded to pull something up and over into the cave. This thing pulled itself to standing. It was about 6 feet tall, with long like deer legs, too skinny to support it, and it ended with small hooves that seemed to float above the ground. The body looked semi-human, but a skeleton draped with rotting, stinking flesh, with patches of mangled fur and ribs protruding from the chest. The smell was rancid, and I wanted to look away, to vomit, and to run, but I was paralyzed with fear, and I kept staring at the long curled antlers and the warped, twisted body, long arms hanging loosely in front, with claws scraping the ground, but mostly the disturbing contorted mix of human and animal intertwined to make a face so haunting. I will remember it vividly on my dying day, I'm sure of it. And when it locked onto my view, with its empty rotten sockets, it met my eyes, then I heard it. Quietly but all around me, the hard howl of mangled words, "Let me help you." With that, I snapped out of my paralyzed state, switched off my safety, and pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times from only 3 feet away. In an instant, the horrible thing before me flickered and was 2 feet away to the right. I fired again and again as this thing twitched and jerked towards me, in a terrifying nightmare coming to consume my very being. I don't remember much of what happened next. Bear was barking, us sprinting, flashlights and gunfire at the jerking and crackling. The putrid breath on my neck and the voice, that evil voice echoing around me. Let me help you. I remember the peak of sunlight, the roar of the side-by-side as me and Bear sped through the desert. We woke up in our shack uninjured, but forever scared by our experience. It keeps me awake every night since, and I need to tell somebody, to warn somebody. Please, if you see the carving of this thing, or an unknown cave, please don't enter. This happened several years ago, when I lived with my ex-boyfriend. We recently moved into a 2-bedroom house, and set to work turning it into a home. We turned the back bedroom into an office, as the house only had 1 bathroom, and it could only be reached through that bedroom. We would have people crash on our sofa regularly, and didn't fancy them having to trapeze through our bedroom to get to the loo in the middle of the night. So we had been living there roughly a month when this event occurred. My ex was out with his colleagues, and I was home alone. I had spent the early evening watching TV and eating takeout. A couple times I heard some strange noises, but whenever I would try to zone in on it and figure out what the hell it was, it would stop. It had got later, so I decided to go upstairs and use the computer for a little bit before going to bed. At this point in time, we hadn't had our phone lines installed, and I was still on a pay and go phone, which had run out of credit. I basically had no way to communicate with anyone while I was in the house that night. So I'm sitting in the back room with only a small table lamp that barely forms a glow. While I'm typing away on the laptop, I heard the noises again. It started as a light rattling noise, really faint, to the point where I had to strain to see if I was really hearing it or if I was imagining it. I shut the music off and tried to figure out what it was. I went into our bedroom and looked down to our front door. Nobody's there. I go back into the back bedroom but can't see much out that window. We had a small yard with a high brick wall, and I saw a wooden gate with nothing to cast any light. From what little I could see, there was nothing in the back either. I sat back down and switched the music back on. Maybe 10 minutes later I hear an eerie screeching sound, like metal on metal. Again, very faint, as if whatever was making it was trying desperately to be quiet. I was getting more than a little freaked out at this point, so I went out of our bedroom to retrieve a heavy iron rod that we had found in the back of the built-in wardrobe. I didn't switch on any lights as I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't want to alert any possible intruders of my location in the house. Remember, I had no way of calling anyone, and I was getting more than a little concerned that someone might actually be in my house. I made my way back into the office bedroom and closed the door as quietly as possible before bolting and lodging a chair under the handle. Nothing more happens for a good 20 minutes or so. I start feeling a little foolish for letting myself get worked up and put it down as being my first night alone in the house. But I don't switch the music back on this time, which was lucky because I started to hear sounds like two people whispering, both male voices. They didn't sound like they were coming from inside the house though. I had the office window open ever so slightly, and the sound seemed to be floating in from there. I headed into the bathroom to see if I could get a better look into the alley that the house backs into. The office bedroom and the bathroom formed a L around a yard, with the bathroom extending further out. I climbed up on the ledge and inched the window open, trying to see out into the alley. I couldn't see anything, but the whispering was louder and coming directly behind the gate. I couldn't hear the whole sentences, but I heard enough to summarize. Whoever these men were, they'd seen us move in, and seen that we had quite a lot of valuable equipment. Guitars, computer, my DSLR, TV, gaming consoles, etc. I imagined they'd seen that I was home alone, and had been waiting for me to go to sleep before trying to get into the house. I stayed perched there for what felt like an eternity, until what seemed like the loudest thud in the world echoed up to me. They'd grown tired of trying to be stealthy, and one or both of them were throwing themselves into the gate, trying to break it down. I could see it shuddering under the blows, and could only imagine how large these men must be. I'm a teeny girl, all about 5'3", and at that point weighed somewhere around 105 pounds. I was white with terror as I watched the gate groan under the stress. I sat clutching the iron rod, trying to think where I could hide from them. Suddenly, a glaring light behind me. At first I panicked and dropped out of sight, thinking they were shining a torch at the back of the house. But then I heard barking and shouting. I peeked again and saw that the house, which was across the alley from us, had a floodlight installed, and it was illuminating both their own yard, mine, and the alley with light. I heard grumbling and cursing and 2 sets of footsteps hurrying down the alley. I stayed locked in the bathroom until my ex-boyfriend drunkenly rolled in at 4 a.m. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and when I went out into the yard that morning, my gate was hanging on by one hinge, allowing easy access from the alley. When I looked at the back of it, the keyhole was covered in scratches, as if someone tried to force open the lock. If they hadn't woken the house behind us, I dread to think what could have happened. At the end of May 1999, I was headed into my freshman year of high school. That summer, me and a group of 6 girls from my church went on a mission trip up to the coast from Riverside, California to Mount St. Helens, Washington. 3 of the girls' mothers acted as our drivers and chaperones. We basically all piled into an old Chevy van and a station wagon, headed up Pacific Coast Highway, and had a trip of a lifetime. I got baptized on this historic mission in San Luis Obispo. We spent 3 days in San Francisco, saw the Capitol, we went to Portland, Oregon, Yosemite. Basically, we got to see every worthy landmark and stay in every noteworthy town from SoCal to the Canadian border. When we stayed in Yosemite Park, we spent 3 nights at the Cedar Lodge. While in Yosemite and sightseeing, the old Chevy van died in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, even though we weren't able to get a cell signal, within an hour someone stopped to help us. This was so long ago that I don't remember the details, but basically, the owner of the van told us later that the mechanic told her someone had tampered with the engine. She was very upset by this, and said it was something done intentionally. The van had to be abandoned, and we had to use a rental the rest of the way. I don't know if this is a coincidence, but turns out that Carrie Anthony Stainer, also known as the Yosemite Killer, was the maintenance man for the Cedar Lodge during this time. He had murdered and decapitated a park ranger by the time that we were guests at the lodge. The very next month, he gained access to a room where a woman and her young daughter and her daughter's young friend were staying. He said he was there to check the room for something. Basically, he knocked on the door in the middle of the night, and because he worked at the lodge, they opened the door. He abducted them, then raped, murdered, and decapitated them. I can't say that I remember seeing him, but we probably did as we were there for 3 nights. It's just one of those things that I look back on and think, he could have easily knocked on one of our doors, as it was just a few weeks before he decided he wanted to abduct and kill us. I feel incredibly lucky we dodged that bullet. If the time frame wasn't so close, it wouldn't creep me out as much, but it continues to haunt me 16 years later. So my husband, Ted, is in the military. We have generally lived on base, every station we've been to, because the surrounding towns can be crime-ridden and sketchy. And with my husband being gone most of the time, the extra security is appreciated. I work from home due to us moving so often. So one afternoon, I was taking a break. I had made a bite to eat and was snuggling up on the couch with my dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so nonchalant that I thought it was Ted. I saw my cat run from the kitchen and the shadow standing next to the door, entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out to him and was like, "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" No answer. This is where I got an eerie feeling. After I asked what he was doing here, I saw the shadow move and heard the click of the sliding door lock. From there, he walked into the laundry room and shut the door. I had still received no response, so I'm sitting on the couch, scared out of my mind. I call my husband, hoping to hear his phone ring in the laundry room. I don't hear a ring, but he answers. I asked him why he came home and didn't answer me, and all he says is, "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get into the car." I freaked out. After getting off the phone with Ted, I grabbed my dog and run to my car. From there, I called the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got there, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement, and even they were baffled that someone would try this on base. We still live there, and I'm so scared that he'll come back. My normal shifts were during the day, 9 to 5 like most people. But on that day, we were short-handed for the night shift because the last person who worked during those hours had just quit. Lately, we had a lot of people quitting the night shift, so this meant I had to cover. Weird enough, I had never worked the graveyard shift before then, and I was actually excited for it. I brought some coffee and a 5-hour energy drink with me, because the hours ran from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and there was no way I could make it that far naturally. I got to the tower right before 10, when it was already pitch black, and the cold July night had fully set in. The tower was fairly tall, with several flights of stairs leading up to the top. The whole thing was surrounded by thick forest, except for the trail that I came from, and it had a murky pond just to the right of the tower's legs. The pond itself was covered with little frog pads, and had algae floating to the surface. It was actually quite big for a natural lagoon. I climbed up, and all I could hear was non-stop sounds of the crickets, frogs, and an occasional owl. When I hit the top, I fumbled with the keys and finally found the right one, and walked right in. The room was small and square-shaped. 3 of the walls were mostly glass, and another one had the door I just came in through. The roof went up like a pyramid for a short length, then it peaked, and it was all made out of wood. To my left side was a nicely made bed and a nightstand with a lamp and flashlight on top. Not like I'd be using the bed though. On the wall next to that was a CB radio and communication stand, which every one of those towers had. Next to that sat a refrigerator and a microwave, which was part of a small kitchen that extended to the other wall as well. Inside the kitchen on the right wall were several cabinets, some small ones that held snacks and some canned foods, and another set of giant cabinets that I couldn't open, which likely had vacuums and other cleaning supplies. I went over to the communication stand and did my standard check to make sure everything was working properly. I called into the ranger station and said, "Well, Donnie, it looks like it's just you and me tonight." Donnie didn't say anything back, so I figured he was just taking a shit. I went to grab the flashlight on the stand and reached into one of the drawers, pulling out a set of binoculars from it. I went back out to the balcony and checked to make sure no fire hazards or any kind of dangerous things were over there. Once I checked that box off my to-do list, I headed back inside and pulled out a chair from the communication stand and put it by one of the glass walls. I grabbed a granola bar from the kitchen cabinets to munch on. I pulled the binoculars up to my eyes and looked out to the surrounding forest. It didn't seem like any animals were up and about, and no birds were in the sky either. I skimmed over a couple of clearings to make sure no teenagers were camping illegally. Then I went and peeked over to the far ridge, where I saw a snowman standing alone in a gap of trees. Hold the hell up. It was July. I peeked again to see it wasn't a snowman, but some kid in a shitty ghost costume. It looked like one of those from Charlie Brown, with the big black holes for eyes that looked more like they were colored black than actual holes. The kid was still and staring right in my direction, unmoving. I couldn't see the parents anywhere, and right now it was rolling up on 11 p.m., so that meant something was up. I broke contact with the kid and walked to the radio, calling into the station. "Donnie, are you off the shitter yet?"
Barely made it, but I'm out here.
I chuckled. Donnie was always good for a laugh. "There's a kid in a blanket walking around on the southeast sector, and they look alone."
A blanket? What the hell are you talking about?
"It's a ghost costume. It's got black holes for eyes and stuff."
You mean like the Charlie Brown costume?
"Can you check it out?"
Yeah, I'll go and see what's up. I'll call you on the walkie-talkie and tell you what I see.
Roger that. I turned off the radio and crossed over to the nightstand drawer to grab the walkie-talkie. Once I had, I sat back down and put the binoculars to my eyes, zooming into where the kid was. The ridge was empty, with no kid in sight, which I knew would make things 1,000 times harder. I pulled up the antenna on the walkie. "Donnie, you hear me?"
Yep, loud and clear. I'm getting close to the sector. I'm heading up the ridge for a vantage point.
"Perfect. That's where I saw the kid, but they've moved on since then."
Well, I'll just check around to see if I find anything.
I watched Donnie come over the ridge, waving his flashlight around in the dark, until he looked towards the tower and shrugged.
Nothing over here.
Damn, hopefully he turns up again. Until then, I'll just notify the police and check for any missing reports.
Alright, I'll go back to the...
Donnie's voice cut out, and I saw his flashlight turn off in the distance. The small lit up spot where he stood was swallowed in darkness. "Donnie, you there? Donnie?" I heard no response. I rushed outside the door and around the corner, looking where I had saw him, only to hear my voice echo in the woods. And that's when it hit me. There wasn't another sound in the whole entire forest. The crickets and frogs had stopped chirping. The wind didn't rustle through the leaves. Everything was completely standstill. I could hear my heartbeat throbbing in my ears, and nothing else. I moved my flashlight around the woods for a futile attempt of finding him. I got into the state of mind where I got scared and my throat closed up, and if I moved I felt like something very bad was going to happen. I had to do something. I turned around, and as I did, I glanced to the stairs below me. At the bottom stood a skinny, horrifically aged woman. She was tall, dripping with water, with black hair and dark, murky blue skin which stretched across her bent and broken bones. Her gray dress was shredded, and her black shoes were muddy and wet. And her face, her eyes were milky white. Her mouth hung wide open, like a snake, like her jaw had been grossly broken. She let out a blood-curdling and ear-piercing scream of agony, and began to shuffle up the stairs so fucking fast. That snapped me out of my paralyzed fear, and I ran back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. There was no way she could run that fast, even if all her bones weren't broken. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and then I pulled out the walkie-talkie, screaming into it. "Is anyone there? Donnie, where the fuck are you? Someone answer me, goddammit!" Then I heard the creaking of the door. I slowly turned, and I froze when I saw what was there. The door was still there, locked and shut, and had been completely undisturbed. What scared me was a once-locked giant cabinet that now stood open, with a kid dressed like Charlie Brown's ghost standing just in front of it. I stood there, unmoving, until I heard that little shit giggle. I recognized that giggle. No fucking way. I pulled off the sheet and it was one of Donnie's kids, Marvin, sporting a smirk and a walkie-talkie. Dad, Joey, I got him.
Ha! Pissed his pants just like he said he would, right?
He and his other son laughed from the other side of the walkie-talkie. I was mad, but glad that I wasn't murdered in this goddamn wooden tower. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and shot back. Pissed me off is what you did, you freaking asshole. I hope you're happy.
Hearing you scream like a little girl sure did make me happy, alright.
Yeah, screw you. That was that stupid zombie chick. Who was that, your wife?
My what? Does the ghost look like a zombie from that far away? You said it yourself that it looked like Charlie.
Not the ghost, dumbass. The woman on the stairs. She screamed and ran up them, so that she could scare me into the tower. Hell, she must be an Olympic runner. Did you get Usain Bolt?
Dean, I didn't put no woman on the stairs.
Upon hearing that I would have to do the night shift for the next couple weeks until they found a replacement, I quit and vowed never to return to the park. To this day, I swear that either Donnie never told me about the part being a prank, or I saw something that was totally unrelated. I was listening to one of those creepy narrators who narrates Let's Not Meet stories, and one of the stories reminded me of a really scary encounter that I had when I was 13. My parents divorced when I was in the 8th grade, and after my dad had moved out, my mom was very single and ready to mingle, so she often left me home alone. I usually have someone stay the night on those nights that I knew my mom wasn't coming home, so that I wasn't totally alone. So one night, my friend and I, who I'll call Jess for this story, was staying the night, and for some reason we had the best internet connection in the garage, so we were just messing around on MySpace and such when we start hearing what sounded like two people talking. Jess and I stopped talking and were trying to hear what the people were saying. We got up and stood by the garage door, but still couldn't make it out, so I went inside and looked through the peephole on my front door. There were two men standing there in the driveway by my garage looking around. I immediately freaked out because they weren't standing on the sidewalk or anything. They were standing by my garage like they lived at my house. I stood there watching for a minute before one of them started walking up to the door. I quickly and very quietly checked to make sure both locks were locked, then looked back up at the peephole. The man was leaning over the side railing on the porch trying to look into my mother's bedroom window. I instantly signaled to Jess to go get knives and be super quiet. I looked back outside and the two men were back talking by the garage. Jessie asked what had happened, and I just told her to make sure all the doors were locked while I kept watch. She came back quickly and we switched. She kept watching while I looked for the house phone. This was before it was normal for teens to have cell phones. All of a sudden she says, "They're leaving." My heart sank because something in my gut told me that they weren't. Without even thinking, I asked her, "Did you lock the side door in the garage?" And she said she didn't. I took off through the kitchen into the garage just as I heard our side gate open. I made it to the door and locked the deadbolt. Before I could get the doorknob locked, the doorknob twisted. I thought I was gonna puke. I grabbed the handle and locked it before running back inside. I ran to the back door at that point and started yelling, "Lock the windows!" My back door had sheer curtains over them, but you could still sort of see inside and outside. And before I was able to make it to lock the door, I saw someone walking to the back porch. I jumped behind the couch and watched as he tried to open the back door before the second guy followed. Jessie came walking in the living room, and I grabbed her and pulled her down behind the couch with me. We both sat there in silence, terrified, watching these two guys try to figure out how to get in. I started to cry, and Jessie was just sitting there, shaking. After what seemed like forever, they walked off the back porch and into the backyard. We heard them banging around before we saw them walk by the porch again and out the side gate. I ran into the front and looked through the people and saw them walking across the street and get into a car. I told Jessie they were gone. We both burst into tears and started hugging each other. We called her aunt and she came to pick us up and took her to her house, and we stayed there that night. We never told anyone else because we thought we'd be in trouble for some reason. But after that, I didn't stay home alone for years. And even at 25, I still get scared when it's just my daughter and I home alone, and my husband is at work, or at the rare occasion when he goes out with friends. We were lucky it didn't end worse than it did, but I'm still scared from it 12 years later. My twin sister Janessa was murdered at the age of 16. I witnessed it like a coward from atop a tree in the forest where it happened. I actually blacked out the memory for a while. I knew she was dead, but I couldn't remember how it happened. It wasn't until I tried therapy that it slowly came back to me. I was also reminded how much my parents used to fight. Our family was planning a camping trip the day before my sister's death. Before leaving, my parents erupted into a massive fight. Janessa and I were looking forward to the trip, and once again our parents' awful communication skills ruined everything before it even happened. We snuck out the house and took a lift to the forest. We left our phones at home, not caring whether our parents would be worried sick. We enjoyed ourselves the first day. I set up our tent, made a fire, had s'mores, and did all the stuff typically associated with camping. The next morning everything changed. I woke up alone in our tent. Outside I hear my sister talking to someone. Inquisitive, I opened the tent and saw someone sitting at our now out campfire who looked just like me. The figure transformed as soon as Janessa realized it wasn't me. Together we ran off. The thing was rushing after us with heavy footsteps. I was faster than my sister and a bit more athletic. I grabbed onto a tree branch and climbed up the tree. Janessa was not so lucky. I watched it happen. I watched that thing tear my sister to pieces. I'm still haunted by her screams. I also understand now why she always appears badly mutilated in my nightmares. I stayed up in that tree overnight, my sister's corpse laying in the leaves. Her remaining eye was staring up at me. While in therapy, there was a moment when I suddenly recalled the hallucination I had the morning of my sister's death. I thought I saw her corpse clawing at the tree where I hid. She wanted me to come down and join her. It caused me to panic and cry out. A couple of men who had been camping in my area heard my screams, and at last I was rescued. My parents don't argue anymore. I hardly see them at all anymore since my sister's death. Over the last couple years, my parents have frequently gone on vacations. They don't tell me where, and I never ask. I usually wake up and find out that they left yet again. I'm out of high school now, and have no career path. I've only really had one thing on my mind since I remembered what killed Janessa. Now I'm returning to that forest where she died, and I'm going after that thing that killed her. I've been preparing for this, and if it's a Wendigo, like I've suspected, then I'm more than ready to take my revenge. This is how I'm doing it. I took a lift again. Had the driver known what I was carrying in my bags, I doubt he would have let me in. As I sat there, the realization of what I was doing grew heavy on me. What the hell am I doing? I've been talking myself up to do this for the last couple years. As much as I wanted a glorious victory, the closer I've come to this day, the more I've started to daydream about dying the same way that Janessa did. As angry as I am with my parents, I don't think they deserve to lose their only remaining child. But I just can't move on knowing that the thing's still out there. My legs were as dense as gold once I tried to exit the cab. The driver watched me awkwardly as I struggled to pull myself out, while putting my backpack on and working to carry the other supplies. Why was I doing this alone? I guess I didn't want anyone else to get hurt in this, but God, I wish I wasn't out here doing this alone. With each step I took into the forest, the more the terror numbed. I was in the domain of the Wendigo now. I wasn't entirely sure how much of the information about them was real. I knew that they could change their appearance. I know that their true form is just like the drawings people have made. There's no way to be an expert on these things unless you actually dealt with one. I'm still not sure why it decided not to come after me. Based on its size, I doubt it would have had any difficulty. Instead, I'm still alive, and crazy enough to come back to pick a fight. As I set up camp, I found myself jumping at the sound of any bird call or movement by any nearby animal. The way I hammered in my tent, I knew I was calling attention to myself. In my left pocket was a gun. Like werewolves, I heard that silver bullets were necessary to kill Wendigos, but what if I was wrong? The thought had been with me ever since I stepped foot back into these woods. I stopped frequently while setting up. Behind a nearby tree, I was almost certain I could see someone watching me, then hiding behind it. I didn't bother to walk over or check it out. I finished up the tent and made up my sleeping bag inside. As I did this, I heard calls that sounded almost human off in the distance. It probably knew I was here. The minutes went by slowly, but soon dusk set upon the forest. I built a fire, like the one Janessa and I had made. I roasted 2 marshmallows. Despite her absence, I made a s'more for her as well, resting it on the sizable rock near the fire. As I ate it, I thought about our last night together. All things considered, it was pleasant. Being twins, we had our moments where we had gotten into arguments like our parents. We'd fought one another. We had our problems. But that night had been pleasant. I'd actually been glad that we decided to camp without our parents. As frightened as I still was, I felt the warmth, not from the fire. A sense of calm came over me, as my memories were suddenly flooded with the good times Janessa and I had. The good times were not for long. I could hear footsteps not far behind me. Jeremy. I could never forget that voice. It sounded like Janessa, but I knew it wasn't her. For some reason I felt compelled to sit there calmly. As it approached, I could tell it was going to take a seat at the rock where I left the s'more. I glanced delicately to my right. I watched as a figure that looked almost identical to the Janessa I remember pick up the s'more and take a bite. That's not yours, I surprised myself by blurting out. The fake Janessa ignored me, continuing to scarf it down. My terror turned to anger. The thing responsible for my sister's death is sitting right next to me, mocking my grief. I didn't wait for it to finish. I pulled up my gun and pointed it directly at the figure. Before I could fire, the creature jumped to the left and turned around. I was stuck with paralysis when I saw the mutilated face of my sister's corpse staring back at me. I'm trapped, Jeremy. I struggled to keep aim. How dare this thing pretend to be her? It won't let me go, and it won't let you go either. We can be together again. It's much nicer than going home to an empty house and unliving parents. She held her hand out to me. Trust me, brother. Please. My trigger finger felt as though struck with a serious case of arthritis. Janessa took a step towards me. Wait, no. It's not Janessa. Why did I suddenly forget that? Feed the forest with me, Jeremy. It's so much better than being dead. Prove it. At last I pulled the trigger. The creature hollered in pain as it fell to the ground. I hit a lung, which wouldn't be enough. I aimed the gun at the heart, but failed to pull the trigger again as it rolled over and jumped back to its feet. Within seconds, it transformed from a corpse of my sister to its massive dark skeletal form with massive antlers. My mind was caught between fight and flight. I stood there aiming my gun, but desperately wanting to flee. As it rushed towards me, I chose the latter option. I rushed over to the bag I had left near my tent. Inside was a weapon that I built myself. As I rushed over, I could tell I wasn't going to outrun it. I fired another shot. The bullet lodged itself into the neck of the beast. It cried out once more, buying me a bit of time to get to the bag. Why didn't I have it unzipped? As I tried to open it, the Wendigo rushed towards me again. Just like the day of Janessa's death, I ran from the campsite, further into the forest, history repeating itself. I wasn't going to fail to avenge my sister. My parents weren't going to lose their last remaining child, all because I couldn't let it go. After at least several minutes, I somehow managed to keep outrunning it. I refused to slow down and look behind my shoulder. As I kept running, I noticed that I had gone in some sort of circle. Up ahead of me was the campsite. I had a chance to grab the bag and pull out the weapon. The closer I came to the campsite, the louder the Wendigo's footsteps became, and I could almost feel the wind as the creature tried to claw me. Once I reached the campsite, I put out my hand, clutching the bag. It felt like almost too great a risk to put the gun back in my pocket, but I needed it free to pull out the weapon. I managed to do this just with my left hand, pulling out the long, metal spike. I built it in such a way that the spike would shoot out at a push of a button. The Wendigo wasn't going to slow down until it had me. I had no choice. I had to turn around. I would have to have perfect timing. I had to collect my debt from the creature that took my twin sister. Chew on this, you son of a bitch. I turned around, pressing the button that shot the spike out. Less than a foot from my face was the Wendigo. Its cry so loud it hurt my ears, and they began to ring. I had done it. The spike pierced the heart. Weakly the Wendigo tried to swipe at me, but somehow lacked the strength. The next part was a gamble. I pulled up my gun and shot it in the head. It wasn't going to be enough to end the Wendigo, assuming what I read was correct. I rushed over to where I dropped the bag, and inside was the silver axe I had also designed myself. When I returned, the creature was still conscious, letting out agonizing cries. I felt no sympathy. I hacked off its wrist first. Its claws were the biggest threat, and I wanted them gone. Despite the weightlifting I've been doing, it took over a dozen hacks to remove the first long-fingered hand. I pulled out my gun and shot it in the head again. It subdued the creature long enough for me to remove the second hand, and then I began on its head. As I began walking up, I again found myself screaming at the creature. I demanded it stay dead, calling it every insulting name that came to mind. Once I had hacked most of my way through its head, I pulled it off. I kicked it a couple feet away. The Wendigo no longer moved. It took about an hour, but I managed to put each limb, the head, and the torso in trash bags that I had brought along. One by one I carried them back to the campsite. I lit another fire, burning each bag. It took until dawn for me to burn the entire body. I left the torso for last. It was a struggle, but I managed to remove the heart, ripped it to pieces, and placed it in a silver box. After locking it, I looked around the site and decided to leave everything except my gun and box behind. I was never particularly religious, but in the months leading up to my fight, I'd gotten to know a priest in a church in my area. Luckily for me, he was there when I arrived with the silver box. His face was several shades paler when I showed it to him. Nevertheless, he escorted me to the back of the church with a pair of shovels and helped me bury it. Once done, I sat there, suddenly flooded with overwhelming emotions. I'd done it. My sister's killer was dead. Its body was burned, its heart in pieces and buried. Janessa, I cried out. I kept my promise. I killed it. The Wendigo can't hurt anyone else. It won't kill anyone else. I placed my lowered head into my hands and continued to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't braver before. I placed some flowers at my sister's grave an hour later. I talked to her tombstone as though she was listening. I like to believe that she was, and that she was pleased with my accomplishment. Afterwards, I returned home and slept through the day and the night. Once the morning came, I heard some noises downstairs. I went down to see my parents were home, sitting down for breakfast. They stopped and looked over at me, saying nothing. I walked over and pulled up a seat. I had no appetite at all. How was your trip? Where did you guys go? My parents exchanged looks before my father replied. We went to go visit your aunt and uncle. Did you enjoy it? I had difficulty keeping my chin from quivering as I lowered my head again. Jeremy, sweetie, what's wrong? Both my mother and father got up and came over to me. Why do you keep leaving me alone? God damn it, I'm your only kid left. Do you not give a shit about me? They hugged me tightly, offering apologies. I could have sworn I felt another pair of hands on my shoulders. The light touch was the most comforting of all. I really hope Janessa is proud of me, but a new task was ahead of me now. A harder task, perhaps. I was going to have to figure out how to reconcile with my parents. Our family had been broken long before her death, but I know with some effort, things could be better than this. I hope she continues to give me the strength to put myself together as I progress into adulthood. So I grew up in Las Vegas. I had moved there when I was in second grade, and I was around 7 or so. My mother was working at a motorcycle repair shop in Arizona, and that just wasn't paying the bills at all. So she jumped at the offer of a new job, of course. Fast forward about 5 years. I'm in middle school now. My brother and I were almost 2 years apart. I was about to turn 12, so he was about 10 at the time. My mother, being quite low on the seniority list, was forced to work late nights. This left me and my brother home alone, after school, more often than not. Our nights were pretty uneventful, usually consisted of avoiding whatever homework we were assigned, warming up leftovers in the microwave, and watching whatever sparked our interest on TV, which was usually WWE wrestling, or some kind of cartoon. We usually ended up in bed before our mom got home, but occasionally we wait up for her. One night, or I suppose one afternoon, considering it was still broad daylight, everything was pretty normal. My brother sat on the living room floor, engulfed on whatever was on TV, and I was using my mom's desktop computer, feeding my virtual pets. Then there was a rather aggressive knock at the door, which was very odd. I was sort of an outcast child, I didn't really have too many friends, nor did my brother. Even then, we lived in what you consider a senior living community. My mom was the youngest adult there, and was around her mid-30s. My brother, being too short to reach the peephole, doesn't move, only slightly reacts and looks at me. I get up from the computer chair and make my way to the front door to glance out the peephole. I see a man in a black ski mask staring back at me through the peephole. It definitely didn't seem real. It sort of seemed like something from a cliche movie, as if he was dressed to rob a bank. I was immediately scared shitless, and I obviously didn't bother to ask who it was. I slightly stepped away, shut the TV off, grabbed my brother and our small black Pomeranian, and ran towards my bedroom. Once we were safely hidden in my closet, I informed him of what I saw outside. He didn't say much, but he was visibly shooken up, and just quietly standing there holding our dog. I slid the teeny flip phone my mom left for us for emergencies out of my pocket and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator the whole call, as the man hadn't left, since the knocks persisted after we left the living room. Somehow she understood me and sent an officer over. Immediately after the call ended with the operator, I dialed our mom. I explained everything to her. She ended up leaving work and headed home around the same time the police had. I'm not sure what deterred him from pursuing further, but of course, the man was gone by the time they both arrived. The officer was clearly not taking any of it seriously, most likely thinking these young boys were just paranoid staying home alone. It was probably just a young man playing a joke on his friend, he explained. However, like I stated, we lived in a senior living center. Who could possibly be playing a joke on? His dear grandma? He then gave us both stickers, as if that would console our nerves, after seeing a masked man pounding hard on our door. Fortunately, I never saw that stranger again, and after that experience, my house, however, had been broken into, as well as my car, 3 times. Thankfully, none of us were present when any of those took place. Since then, my family has moved out of state and installed a security system. I'm currently hiding in my closet, shaking in fear. I'm typing this out now on my phone, so sorry if there's formatting issues or grammar, but I don't really give a shit right now. In case I don't make an update to this post, please report it to the authorities. Or anyone, please. I don't know what to do. During April of 2018, I adopted a 5-month-old puppy from the pound. I was lucky enough to get her out of that hellhole and into a loving home. She's a boxer collie mix, and her name is Nellie. I don't know what the heck happened to her, but what I have now is not my dog. She was a timid pup when I first brought her home. I remember she was inside for less than 5 minutes before she peed on the carpet. I could only laugh and kiss her because I was so happy. She slept on my bed that night, and many more nights to come. She only weighed about 6 or 7 kgs when I first picked her up. The months that followed were amazing. For the first time since I graduated high school, I was over the moon. Every day when I got home from work, she would rush to greet me, with her leash dangling from her mouth, tail wagging wildly. She absolutely loved to grab the newspaper from the mailbox with me. She was an awesome chick magnet, but that's besides the point. She loved my neighbor, a nice man named Paul, whose wife recently passed away from breast cancer. He was an older gentleman, well into his 50s, but didn't look a day over 40. He liked to throw barbecues for the few neighbors we had in our little rural community. He always made an effort, so we all returned the favor, with bringing him food and beer. Things began to change in December of 2018. In the early hours of the morning, on the 5th I believe, Nellie woke me up. I grabbed my glasses from the bedside table and flicked on the lamp. She stood there about a meter away from the door, pointing right at it. I could hear a low growl emanating from her. Curious, I got out of bed and opened the door. To my surprise, there was nothing there. I thought that would be the end of it. A few days passed, and it's the 9th, and it happened again. Early hours in the morning, and pointing at the door. This continued for the next week. I believe this is when Nellie disappeared. At about 2 a.m. on the 21st, Nellie woke me up, wanting to go outside. She would do this once every few weeks, so it's nothing out of the ordinary. She would wake me up by licking my face, and then sulk and lay down in front of the door if I wouldn't get up. Behind my backyard is a forest that extends for miles. Sometimes Nellie liked to hunt down rabbits and possums when we go for a walk through the woods. When I let her go that night, she walked about 5 meters before the tree line. I watched her pee, and then she started her way back towards the house. This is where things didn't go exactly as planned. She must have heard something because she whipped around and pointed to the trees and growled. I thought it might have been a rabbit, but thinking back at it now, it was probably something much worse. She barked and made a beeline for the trees. She disappeared into the thickness before I heard more barking. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I was about to grab a torch, but then the tree started rustling. There was no wind. It was distressing to say the least. Then they stopped. I called her name and waited. About a minute later, she wandered out of the trees and back inside. I thought nothing of it and promptly went back to sleep. I should have thought about it. As the months continued, things got weird. She stopped wanting to go for walks. She cut back on her food and began to get skinnier. I decided to change her diet from dog biscuits to meat. She liked that. She really liked that. Sometimes she would run off to the woods to go hunting for rabbit or anything else she could get her paws on. I also noticed that she started getting bigger. Then she stopped playing with her toys. That weirded me out the most because she loved her squeaky duck toy that I got for her the same day she came home, and was always in her mouth, and it was always with her inside the house. Now it lay gathering dust in the corner of the room. But she began to show a liking to the barbecue get-together that Paul would always throw. A little too much. Honestly, that should have been a warning sign. The day was the 26th of February, 2019. In the following weeks, people unfortunately died. It was small to begin with. That makes it sound a lot better than it was. Old people died first. As sad as it sounded, we all just thought it was just because of old age. Then we got the details. Horrific details. They were murders. Violent, bloody murders. We were absolutely scared shitless. Paul and I started communicating a lot more than we used to. A text every hour or so, just to check in, or maybe a phone call or two. He told me that I should keep my key for my gun safe in the lock in case of emergency. I listened because I trusted him. I listened because he was one of my only friends. This brings us to tonight, the 24th of May. I woke up to the sound of gunfire. I rushed over to my curtains and yanked them open. Paul's house was on fire. I immediately rushed to put on some thick clothes and grab my flashlight and phone, ready to dial 111 for a fire truck. At that time I didn't even notice my bedroom door was open, when I clearly remember closing it when I went to bed that night, nor did I notice that Nellie was missing. I yanked open the back door and I froze. It was illuminated by the bright fire of Paul's home. It stood on its hind legs, tall and lanky, completely black with white highlights over its body. The eyes were almost glowing red, its claws were massive, and sadly one set was clearly protruding through Paul's chest. I actually don't know. It feels like so long ago, even though it was only an hour ago. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't even feel the flashlight slip through my fingers and land heavily on the concrete ground on my back patio. I instantly realized my mistake and saw it look at me. It looked me deep in the eye, and I saw her, my sweet girl, my Nellie, or more rather, what was pretending to be Nellie. It dropped Paul to the ground and terrifiedly reared its head into the air and howled deeply. It sounded like a mix between the sound of absolute pain and what I could only describe as Lupin's howl from Prisoner of Azkaban. This was the only motivation I needed to run. I hauled ass into my bedroom and dove into my closet and shut the door. I covered myself with dirty laundry and stayed still. It felt like I laid there for a million years. It walked, or stalked more rather, into my room. I heard its claws clatter against my hardwood floor before stopping. I couldn't see a damn thing, but I heard it howl once again before it sounded like it tore my bed into bits. I heard glass smash and hard objects collide with the wall. Then nothing. Complete silence once again before I heard it sulk off and leave my house, probably to finish off eating my friend. It's now 7 a.m. I hear sirens outside, but I'm too afraid to leave this in case that thing is waiting for me on the other side of the door. The only thing I could do for the last hours was type this out and do research, but it didn't make any sense. I googled everything I could remember about this thing. I got results that I'm fairly certain is what it is. It didn't make any sense. I read pages upon pages of this thing, looked at artwork, folklore, everything. It doesn't make sense. The research says the location for this creature is found in the United States, usually in the Native American land. So what in the hell is a damn Wendigo doing in rural New Zealand? About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground, the Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I love that park so much. I rode more miles on my bike there than anywhere else. I've walked nearly every trail and rode every road. Every day, I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, I rode a bit further than usual. On my way back, however, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roaming, and there's a large spring fountain there for all to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a long stone bridge, across a creek, then up a road to my home. It was dark at this time, and I had to use the full moon to see. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I felt a sharp pain in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise, like something hit the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. Me being confused, I start looking up the side of the hill. Just as I turn my head, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down and hits my front wheel. My eyes are finally adjusted, and I see a very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill throwing something at me and screaming. I yelled that I had a cell phone and I was going to call the police. I didn't actually have one, as I wasn't at the age to have a cell phone yet. This seemed to piss it or him off more. He started charging down the hill at me. I, for obvious reasons, lit up my bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a large splashing noise in the creek and saw a large rock that had been thrown. I was in the clear to get home, but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station the next morning and told the ranger about what happened. He says, "So you were attacked by Bigfoot?" while snidely laughing. I don't know what it was, but something was trying to hurt me there. Okay, Justin, if I have any more Bigfoot encounters, I'll let you know what we get. I said fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight when the park rangers pulled up next to me and told me to get in. I asked why. He said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town. Before we got out of the car, he turns to me and says, "Justin, I owe you a huge apology. I will be honest, I didn't believe the story you told me about you being attacked. However, it has come to my attention that a couple was in the same area last night and was attacked in the same way. They told me that some large hairy creature was throwing rocks and sticks and screaming at them. They called the police, and the police came out with some rangers, including myself. I immediately thought of what you told me. When we arrived, we started up the hill. Sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us. We drew our guns, yelling, and 2 officers tackled the man to the ground. He was 6'5", naked, covered in mud with long hair and a large beard. He had escaped from the Veterans Center across Veterans Lake. Apparently he thought that he was back in Vietnam and that he was trying to take out the enemy. The park ranger continued to say that I was very lucky because he was trying to kill me. We went inside so I could give the police my statement as to what had happened. After that, they had sent him to a more secure facility somewhere else. To this day I get shivers when I hike the trail, and I'm always keeping an eye on the ridgetop. I do feel bad for his PTSD and other mental illnesses, but crazy naked Bigfoot man, let's not meet again. I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for my friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to the door to answer it without checking through the peephole first. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was enraged in the disappointment, and my friend's still not arriving yet, so I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with stripes, like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went upstairs to where the bathrooms were and walked into the open door of my room. The typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God, my sister came downstairs at that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait, if Daphne isn't here, who is that? "Oh, he's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung the door open and dragged me out, hands clamped around my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone, it being the 60s, and obviously we weren't going into the house to call authorities on the landline. Then my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking by our house, and she motioned him over. She called out loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good that you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." Just as she hoped, the man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, and if we needed him to stay with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because our parents left her in charge and she was worried that she would get in trouble. I didn't want her to catch any heat from my carelessness, allowing some guy in. So I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone and the authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe that it was the same man. They also tracked down the man that helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked at the butcher shop, we just hadn't recognized him. He became a lifelong friend of the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. Though they did have to review the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and said that she'd been held for a few days and then buried alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He looked like he was in his late 30s in 1960, so in any case, he has to be dead by now. I thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. I was still young when this happened, so I don't really remember it. So this is a story that my mom told me. When I was 5 or 6, my family and a family of friends all went camping together one summer in New Hampshire. Each family had a camper, and we were all set up in one campsite. The campground had a playground and a lake nearby, and there was always something going on. One day, my friend Kelsey and I, who was around the same age as me, were playing outside of our campsite as our moms talked outside of the camper, keeping an eye on us. At some point, an old man came walking by our campsite. He seemed like a normal guy according to my mom, but then he started to walk up and start a conversation with our parents. He said that he owns the campsite a little ways down the path, and he said he had a little playground behind his camper. He then said that my friend and I are allowed to come over anytime we wanted to play in his campsite. My friend's mom was oblivious to the situation and told him that was a very nice gesture and we could possibly go by later. My mom, on the other hand, who had experiences with creeps, shut him down and told him no and to go away. He walked away and my mom's friend started asking my mom why it was such a big deal. My mom told her that there was already a playground at the campground and that we were not allowed to go over there under any circumstances. She even went around the other campsites to warn people about this man and to stay away from him. Weeks passed, the camping trip was over, and everyone was home for the rest of the summer. My mom was doing things around the house and she gets a phone call from her friend from the camping trip. Her friend is freaking out, apologizing, telling her that she would never go against her judgment again, and tells my mom to turn on the news. When my mom turns on the TV, there he is. Apparently he had gone to a local pharmacy and tried to get some pictures developed. They found hundreds of pictures of underage girls and child pornography, including his infant granddaughter. So creepy guy in the campground, I pray we don't meet again. Since I posted this story, I talked to my boyfriend and his mom about this story. Apparently my boyfriend's family used to go to the same campground and actually knew this person I was talking about. He would fix the bikes of the kids in the campground, and even my boyfriend's. This is an insane coincidence, and I thought that I would share. So I was home alone on a Tuesday. My brother was at school and my parents were at work. I was 18 at the time. I was taking a bath when I heard my dog barking. It's a pretty normal thing because he barks when people walk by the house, and we have a big window for him to watch from. But this time his barking sounded far away. I kept listening and realized he sounded like he was outside. And I was like, okay, I definitely didn't let him outside. So I quickly put on my clothes and went to my parents' bedroom and looked out their window because it faces the backyard. My dog was actually outside. I realized that someone must have been in the house, so I quickly hid in my parents' room. And of course, my cat sees me and wants in. She's the loudest cat you'll ever hear. She's deaf, so she doesn't really know how loud she is when she meows, so I quickly let her in. And of course, I decided to hide in the loudest, creakiest room in the house. I didn't want to risk being seen, so I stayed. Anyways, I still wasn't 100% sure that someone was in here, because I get paranoid easily sometimes. I freeze at any sound I hear in the house when I'm home alone. 7 years prior, our house had been broken into while I was at school, which is directly across the street from where I live. I decided to call my dad on his cell phone, even though he worked farther away than my mom. I knew he would answer right away. I couldn't really call my mom because she's a teacher, and schools have horrible cell service. So I called my dad and told him, I think someone's in the house. And he was like, okay, call the police. So I called the police, and at that point I could definitely hear someone downstairs in the kitchen, opening up cupboards and stuff. The person stayed on the line with me the whole time, asking me things like my name, age, and stuff to calm me down, I guess. But by that point, my voice was getting pretty shaky. My cat was meowing her usual hello meow at me loudly, over and over, which didn't help, as I was trying to hide from the intruder. So eventually the operator asked me if there should be any cars parked in the driveway. I said no. She said there's a blue Saturn with a license plate, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, that's my mother's car. By that time I heard someone downstairs yell, police! I went downstairs to see my mother, and a couple of policemen looking at me. I explained that that was my mom, and I didn't think she was supposed to be home. This was a Tuesday at noonish. She never comes home for lunch. She apparently had a meeting at my brother's school that day. They said to try to communicate better in the future. At least I know they can be at my house within 5 minutes. So yeah, that's my story. P.S. Sorry, Mommy. I worked at a state park one summer, doing maintenance, mostly cleaning bathrooms, mowing grass, maintaining campsites, etc. I usually worked 8 to 4:30, but once in a while there's programs at the parks, and we would have to stay late to either set up for the next day or because the program was in the evening. There was also a historic village in the park, and people would sometimes rent the chapel on weekends for weddings. This is one of the things sometimes we would have to stay late to set up. One of the first things I was told on the job was not to be surprised if we saw people doing the deed in the woods. Apparently this park was a very popular hookup spot for people. If we saw them, we were supposed to tell them to stop. Most people just looked sheepish, stopped, and moved along. Mainly we didn't want little kids exposed to that. The park rangers patrolled at night too, and they said that they would catch people in the park then also. Mainly teenagers, cheaters, and gay men. My boss actually showed us a website of how our park had made some sort of top 10 list for local hookup spots for some forum for cheaters, and another one for gay men. The park was apparently just a good hookup spot. The park rangers would tell us usually just to write down the plate numbers and tell the people not to come back, and then write a ticket if they did. So one night, we have to stay late. It's around sunset. We're getting ready to go home. As we drive through the historic village, we see a naked guy, just furiously rubbing his balls on the outside of one of the brick buildings. I mean, this guy was just slamming his balls into the wall. Yes, balls to the wall, and rubbing them up and down. I didn't bother to pay any attention, but the co-worker I was with said the guy's sack was starting to bleed, so we start yelling at him to get out of there. This guy just sprints off to the middle of the woods. One ranger comes to talk to us, the other one cruises around and gets the other maintenance truck to do the same, looking for cars in the lots. We check them all, and there's no cars that don't belong to the staff. Whatever. Freak's gonna freak, we figured. Maybe this guy had been meeting someone there and got carried away, or was on drugs or something. Anyways, a few days later, one of the park rangers who wasn't there that night asked me and my co-worker to come see him and go over the story. We tell him what happened. The park ranger tells us that he had caught some teenagers a week before, making out in the park, who had told him about what sounded like the same guy. He thought they were bullshitting and trying to get out of trouble or something. Now he thinks they weren't. Same building, right around sunset. After that, the ranger kept an eye out for this guy. and my coworker would check for blood marks on the building every morning. A couple of times he insisted that he found some. Someone else reported seeing a naked guy later that summer doing the same thing, but no one else did after that. My biggest question to this day is who literally gets off by rubbing their sack violently against a historic building. I work the late shift at the Majestic Movie Theater in Phoenix. Now don't misunderstand. I don't mean that I work at the concession stand from 5 to 10, then go home and get a full night's rest. No, I work the graveyard hours of midnight to 8 in the morning. You see, my local theater has a history of, well, security problems. Not too crazy, a few break-ins, vandalism, and one guy shot himself in the bathrooms a few years back. Needless to say, all of this made the owner of the theater a little antsy, so he decided to hire some security guards to patrol during the night. Well, security guard. That guard being me. I want you to get a mental image of what you think a security guard looks like. Okay, now, I want you to take that mental image and throw it in the garbage. I didn't wear any type of vest or armor. I don't have a gun, nor a baton, for that matter. My job isn't to be Rambo. My job is to patrol the theater and make sure that local teens don't break in and paint dicks on the Lion King movie poster. Other than that, if there were to be some actual threat, I've just been instructed to batten down the hatches in the manager's office and wait for the police to arrive. Not that I've ever had to do that. Either way, I don't think that's an option this time. My shift this evening started out simply enough. I made my rounds to the screening rooms, did a quick search of the bathrooms, chased off 2 teens who seemed to think that the back alley of the theater as their smoking ground. After I was sure the 2 youths had scurried off the property, I made my back inside and moseyed my way through the Hall of History, as my boss called it. You see, my boss has a passion for film. He doesn't own the movie theater for the money, though I'm sure he wouldn't complain about that. My boss feels that it's his duty to educate the people of our community about the history of film. So in the hallway that leads up to the screening rooms, there are posters of old movies, with small plaques explaining their importance to the history of film. We also have some older films on Monday nights, our classic nights, as my boss calls it. Though you might as well call it geezer night, as the only people the classic nights seem to attract are old geezers and ghosts. As I strolled past the old, dust-collected posters, I noticed that, down the hall, one of the posters was laying face down on the old, stained carpet. I immediately felt my stomach drop. If that poster was damaged, it's coming out of my paycheck. I rushed over to assess the damage. I flipped the frame over to see that the glass had cracked. And I'll admit, I jumped a bit. Facing me was Count Orlok's pale, fang-toothed face with text above him reading, Majestic Theater, 20 cents for children, 35 cents for adults. My unnecessary fear quickly dissipated as I looked up to see that this particular frame poster fell from the horror section. I gave myself a quick chuckle from my self-imposed jump scare and hung the poster back up next to its horror compatriots. I figured that one of the 2 punks outside must have snuck in trying to get some stale popcorn from the concession stand, only to knock over one of the posters and run out the back. All in all, nothing to worry myself with. Get a dental plan, Orlok, I remember snidely saying, before letting out another small chuckle. I decided that now was a good enough time to take a break from my rounds, so I waltzed my way into screening room number 5, took a long walk down the ramp to the front row of the seats, then plopped my butt down in one of the old, squeaky, barely cushioned chairs. I opened my old, beaten-up lunch bag to reveal a sad, smushed-down turkey sandwich and a few crushed-up potato chips. I quickly devoured my food, wishing that I was actually watching a movie rather than staring at a blank, silver screen in the dark. After I was finished, I let out a long, long sigh. How did it come to this? When I was a child, surprisingly enough, I didn't dream of sleeping half the day away, only to spend the other half guarding some old rundown theater. No, when I was a kid, I dreamt of being a police officer. Not just some security guard, an actual police officer. Hell, it was more than a dream. It was close to reality. As I sat there, crust of my sandwich in hand, and self-pity on my mind, the projector suddenly kicked on. I nearly jumped out of my chair. Do my best to sound authoritarian and be loud enough to be heard over the obnoxious sound of gunfire coming from the screen. I yelled, "Who's up there?" Unsurprisingly, the response I was given was nothing but dead air. I quickly rushed out of the screening room towards the stairway to confront what I was sure to be one of the two teens who had come back to prank me. I must admit, I was a little too excited that someone was trespassing in a theater. Finally, this job was going to have some excitement. I rushed up the stairway, eager to catch the trespasser. I ran down the cramped hallway that connected to the projector room until I finally reached number 5. I flung the door open, nearly taking it off its hinges, to reveal nothing. Besides the stacks of discs on the shelves, an old fold-out chair, and the projector busily humming away as it projected the beginning of the latest Fast and Furious flick. There was nothing. Nobody. As I caught my breath from the long run up the stairway, it finally dawned on me what must have happened. You see, these projectors don't need someone to turn them on. They can be turned on manually, but usually, the projectors are set on a timer to begin projecting the movie at the designated showtimes. So, one of the employees must have thought it would be funny to play a prank on me and set the projectors to start playing after hours. I had finally calmed down after the meaningless pursuit and shut off the projectors. I was about to turn around and go about my normal rounds once again, when I suddenly noticed it. The projector room smelled awful. I mean, the whole theater had an off smell about it, but the projector room smelled absolutely awful. It smelled like marsh water and rotten eggs blended together. Suddenly, even more things began to dawn on me. The other employees would have no way of knowing that I would be in screening room number 5 when the projector went off. Someone would have had to see me going into the screening room to know to set that projector off. As I processed all of this, I became aware of one last thing, a dripping noise coming from right behind me. It didn't sound like water dripping. No, it sounded like a thick, oozing liquid slowly falling and pooling on the ground behind me. At this point, I accepted it. There was someone in the room with me. I slowly turned around to face what I assumed would be a mundane trespasser. I wish I hadn't. I wish I would have bolted for the exit the second I noticed that something was amiss. For a moment, I didn't see anything, just the door that I had flung open, and the row of filing cabinets. However, I soon noticed it. A set of yellow, cat-like eyes peering at me from atop the cabinets, cloaked in shadow. Gelatinous, gooey drool was pouring down the side of the cabinet, pooling on the floor. Before I had time to process what I was seeing, the beast jumped from its perch atop the cabinets and landed on the floor in front of me with a loud thud. The beast slowly began to stand upright. Its spine made a sickly cracking sound, as if it hadn't stood upright in centuries. The thing was about 7 feet tall, its head almost scraping against the roof of the small projection room. It reached its hand out towards me, if you can call it a hand. Its fingers were far too long and were sharpened to a point. The back of its palm was covered in blisters and boils that looked as if they could pop and shoot out thick pus at any moment. As it reached out towards me, I backed away in sheer fear. This angered it, and in response, it lunged forward, finally revealing its full form under the dim light bulb that buzzed overhead. Now, what I'm going to say next is going to sound crazy. It is crazy, but I know what I saw. And after what I saw tonight, I'm willing to believe that anything is possible. The figure that stood before me was Count Orlok. He had long, pointed, bat-like ears that seemed as sharp as razors. He was completely bald, not a speck of hair on his body. The thick drool continued to pour out of his mouth, making a frothing sound, as it slipped past his sharpened maw of teeth. His skin was pale, stretched, and looked almost paper-thin, as if crudely masking a beast even more horrifying underneath. He continued to close in on me, slowly backing me into the wall next to the projector. Whatever this thing was, it was clearly enjoying the amount of fear it was willing inside of me. It towered over me, burying its long, razor-like fingers near my throat. I knew the only way out was through that door. Now the beast was blocking. In a panic, I grabbed a hold of the projector and threw it against the beast's head, completely shattering the projector in the process. He let out a guttural, inhuman screech as I pushed past him and ran down the hallway towards the stairs. As I pushed past him, however, he blindly struck me with his knife-like fingers, leaving a gash along my back. As I ran, I looked back to see him continuing his pursuit. He didn't run like a man, but rather like some wild animal on all fours. Slobber continued to pour out of his mouth in heaps, leaving globs of it behind him as he ran. In my fear, however, I forgot to look where I was running, and before I had time to react, I unexpectedly stepped on one of the descending stairs, losing my balance, and was sent careening down the flight of metal steps. When I finished my tumble, my head slammed into the door that led to the main lobby area of the theater. My head throbbed. My vision began to blur. The last thing I remember seeing before blacking out was his shadow slowly descending the stairs. I awoke sometime later. The first emotion I felt was unrelenting panic. I scanned the room, sure that I would see Orlok's gaping mouth ready to devour me, but I didn't. In fact, I was still at the bottom of the stairway, sitting in a small pool of my own blood that leaked from my back. I breathed a quick sigh of relief, only for a sharp pain to rocket through my body. I had a huge bruise on the right side of my torso, and I had a gash on my head that was bleeding pretty badly. The bleeding on my back, however, had sustained. As I pulled myself off the floor, I began to question what I just experienced. Was anything that I witnessed real? If a blood-hungry monster was really after me, why wouldn't it finish me off when I fell down the stairs? Maybe the gash on my back was from the fall as well. No, that had to be real. Even my mind couldn't come up with something that deranged. I decided to put that all aside for the time being. Whether what I experienced was real or not didn't matter for the time being. I was sure of one thing, that the gash on the back of my head, leaking blood, was very, very real. And if I didn't get to a hospital, I would have plenty of time to mull over my experience in the next life. I steadied myself using the handrail on the stairs and opened the door to the main lobby area. I managed to limp my way over to one of the cushioned chairs. I caught my breath for a few moments as I sat there, slowly pondering what to do now. Drive to the hospital? No. With this gash in my head bleeding, I'm getting lightheaded, plus my leg is all busted up from the fall. I'm not in a good enough state to drive. No, I had to call the ambulance. I was going to have to call 911. I was going to have to call one of my would-be coworkers for help, as I was going to have to either explain to them that I saw a fictional lord of the night and get locked in the loony bin for the rest of my life, or explain that I simply fell down the stairs and battered my head open for my incompetence and lose my job for being a liability. Yeah, that's me alright, a big liability. I remember how she said it, the sweet psychologist with her curled hair and her pearl earrings. How she tried to stroke my ego by saying I was suited physically for the job, and how she kept her big false smile as she transitioned into saying how I had showed some concerning signs during my psychological evaluation. How she placed her cold, manicured hands on my shoulder and said I should seek further care, and how I would not be accepted into the police force. I would be too much of a liability. None of that mattered now, though. I was bleeding, in the middle of the crappy theater, in the middle of the night. I had to swallow my pride and call for an ambulance. I took out my cheap flip phone and typed in those numbers, 911. The phone rang once, then twice, then once more. For a split second, I almost thought they weren't going to pick up. My fear was quickly vanquished, though, when I heard the ringing finally ceased, and I was greeted with the cold, familiar female's voice of a dispatcher. 911, what's your emergency? Hi. I need you to send an ambulance to the Majestic Theater, near Route 5. I've been in an accident, I said, trying to hide my embarrassment over having to call for help. Certainly, sir. What is the nature of your emergency? She said coldly. I'm a security guard here at the theater. I accidentally fell down the stairs, and I'm bleeding pretty bad. You fell, sir? The dispatcher said, in a confused tone. Yeah, I tripped and fell down the stairs doing my rounds, I explained, irritated by the questioning I was being subject to. There was a moment of silence, and I almost assumed that I lost connection, but after what felt like an eternity, the dispatcher finally spoke. Sir, I'm afraid I can't help you if you don't tell the truth, she said, her voice now monotone in nature. I sat there confused by what she said. What does she mean? I tried to think of a response, and settled on the most intelligent response I could think of. What? Another moment of silence passed, and then she spoke. Sir, I recommend you find somewhere to hide. There's something in the fog. I opened my mouth to try to respond, but as I did, I heard that familiar beep beep of my cell phone. I looked down at the screen that read, Call ended. My blood ran cold as I read the text on the screen. I think everyone knows that the police dispatchers are not supposed to hang up. My mind began to race, and I thought about what she said. What did she mean I was lying? How could she have known that? What was she talking about near the end? What fog? I finally looked up from my phone and saw it. The outside of the glass automatic doors, there was a thick, dense fog. I slowly rose from my chair, gazing out the glass doors. I limped over to the doors, half expecting them to slide open and allow the fog to leak in and swallow the theater whole, but they remained firmly shut. As I limped closer to the door, I noticed the foul smell from earlier had returned, fermenting the whole theater. The nausea from the smell and the lightheadedness from the bleeding didn't make walking any easier, but I persisted. After my long trek from my seat to the door, I was finally able to peer out to the parking lot, or where the parking lot would have been. The fog was so dense that it seemed to swallow up everything outside. I could barely see the sidewalk outside, let alone any cars. There was absolutely no way I could drive in the state I was in, and even if I was fit enough, I'd be likely to get lost in the fog and bleed to death before I could even come close to finding my car. I began to turn around, ready to call 911 again, when I remembered what the dispatcher had said. There's something in the fog. That phrase sounded so familiar. Before I had time to ponder on it anymore, I was startled by a sudden wet slap against the glass. I whipped around to see a hand firmly planted against the door. I stared for a moment. The hand didn't move at all. It simply remained smeared against the glass. As I stood there, frozen from both fear and confusion, I let out a single word. Hello? As soon as I did, as if on cue, another hand smashed itself against the glass. Then another. Then 3 more. Soon there was a chorus of palms smashing themselves against the glass, slowly cracking it. Even in my blood-loss-driven stupor, I could tell that whoever these hands were attached to meant me harm. The hands continued to smack the glass, reeled back, disappearing into the thick gray fog, and then smacked the glass again. I began to limp away from the doors as fast as I could. I tried to think of a route of escape out of the building, but quickly axed that idea. Even if I managed to get outside, I would just get lost in the fog. What would I do then? Just hope someone happens to be out on a stroll at 3 a.m. in the morning, in the worst fog Arizona had ever seen, and helps me? No. I had to fall back on old habits, get to the manager's office, and batten down the hatches. I limped towards the concession stand and leaned against it, using it for leverage as I walked. I just had to make it to the stairway. I slowly made my way to the door that led to the stairway, all while the hands continued to pound on the glass. Sadly, Lady Luck decided she was going to be in a mischievous mood that night. As I made my way past the soda machine, I stepped in a puddle of Coke and Fanta and slipped, landing back first on the syrupy mess. The fall hurt bad enough, but the soda seeped into my gash on my back and sent a white-hot pain through my entire body. My vision began to blur again, and my ears began to ring. I feared that I might pass out, but my senses returned to me. The first thing I heard after the ringing in my ears subsided was the glass of the automatic door shattering. I heard sounds of wet feet slapping against the tile floor soon after. It took a moment, but I managed to grab a hold of the ledge of the concession stand and pull myself to my feet. In hindsight, I wish I accepted my fate and just closed my eyes. When I got to my feet, I finally saw the source of the hands before me, slowly filing through the shattered automatic door. It was a crowd of lepers, though I very much doubt they were alive. Most of them didn't seem to have a pound of fat or muscle on their bodies. They looked like skeletons with skins simply draped over them. As I pulled in through the doors, some fell, and some had glass shards embedded into their torsos, but this didn't seem to faze them. They just got back up and continued their unrelenting march, their march towards me. I hesitated to turn my back to them, but soon turned and continued my slow limp towards the door, with the gash on the back of my head still bleeding away, and with me barely being able to stand after the abuse my legs had taken. I imagine I looked quite a lot like them. The lepers were slow, but I was even slower. As I made my way to the door, they were slowly gaining on me. If I could just make it. Lady Luck decided to do me a favor for once. I flung the door open and limped my way through the doorway. I turned to grab a hold of the door handle, ready to slam the door closed. I gazed through the doorway. The fog was slowly leaking into the theater. I couldn't see the concession stands, let alone the automatic doors, but I was sure even more of them were piling in. They never sped up, continuing their pursuit of me in a snail's pace. After I was done gawking over the scene before me, I slammed the metal door shut. I leaned against the door and slid down to the floor. I could hear them approaching, but I was sure that this metal door would hold up longer than the glass one did. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath and letting what just occurred sink in. I didn't have much time to rest though, as I soon heard the sound of the fleshy hands smacking against the other side of the door. I rose to my feet and slowly ascended the staircase, holding the handrail for my dear life. Once I reached the top, I stared down the hallway, with the doors lining the wall to the projection rooms, and the lone door at the end of the hallway leading to the manager's office. I half expected Orlok to jump out from one of the projection rooms, but luckily he didn't. I began to limp my way down the hallway towards the office door. As I did, a sudden nostalgic feeling rushed over me. Oh yes, that's why. Walking down the hallway, it reminded me of the day I got rejected from the police force. I remember that walk of shame very well. I walked down the dry, colorless hallway towards the exit sign after the psychologist informed me that I failed my psych test. I remember seeing a few of the other cadets averting their eyes from mine. Others gave me a sad, solemn look. They all must have known that I failed and was just officially rejected. No one stopped me though. No one placed their hand on my shoulder or said it was going to be okay. No one even tried to talk to me. No, they just let me walk out of the station and to my car. And thank God they did. I needed to get out of there quickly. After all, I had just strangled the psychologist to death in the other room. This brings us to right now. I'm currently locked in my manager's office. I managed to stop the bleeding from the gash in my head, but I was still pretty banged up. It's been about 2 hours since I came in here, so for all I know, time might be frozen considering all the supernatural things that have already happened. All he's got in here is some old filing cabinets, a desk, and an old laptop. I've already tried to contact the police on it, but it seems like there's some type of interference that won't allow me to contact them. Whatever is preventing me from contacting the police is most likely the same entity that caused all these monstrosities to appear tonight. As some of you probably gathered at this point, whatever this thing is, it seems to be able to imitate movies, especially horror movies. I don't know what this entity is, or why it decided I needed to die. Maybe it's some type of phantom that's been watching all these movies in the theater since it first opened, and I angered it somehow. Or maybe it's my hand of karma, come to reap vengeance on someone who bears the mark of Cain. Or, who knows, maybe it's the ghost of the guy who shot himself in the bathroom, come to haunt me in the theater, and he just doesn't like me. Why it decided to take form of the movie theater monsters to try to kill me, I don't know. Maybe it's just a sick sense of humor. Now, you may be wondering, if I've been in the manager's office for 2 hours, why hasn't the entity just turned into Orlok again and phased through the door, or transformed into Jason Voorhees, or Jack Torrance and chopped down the door? Again, I don't have the answers, but my guess is it wants me to die a slow death. What do I mean by that? Well, about an hour ago, I smelled that foul smell again. Soon after, a thick pink jelly-like substance leaked through the room underneath the door. The blob. Now, the jelly substance has slowly expanded. It's reached the roof and has been slowly swallowing up furniture in the office, what little there is. It swallowed the filing cabinet first, then the desk, while I was writing this. The filing cabinet has been completely dissolved at this point, and the desk is being digested as I speak. I'm currently backed into the corner, with the jelly slowly spreading across the floor, threatening to envelop the laptop, my only source of communication with the outside world. Then I'll be next. I would like to say that I'm not afraid to die, but I'd be lying. The truth is, I'm scared shitless. I never wanted to die in a shitty movie theater by some Lovecraftian horror. However, I've been going over through tonight's events in my head, and one thing that caught my eye. The dispatcher on the phone. She said she can't help me if I didn't tell the truth. Thinking back, I know that voice of the dispatcher. Oh yes, I knew it all too well. It was the voice of that damn psychologist. So while I sit here with the blob slowly digesting the room I sit in, I wonder, what if by the truth she didn't mean that I needed to admit that I saw Count Orlok, but I need to admit what I've done. If I admitted what I did, will this all end? I mean, if I admit it, it most certainly means that I'll get the death penalty, but it sure beats the slow digestion by the blob. Shit, the keyboard is almost completely enveloped. It's now or never. Look, I know that everything I've said up to now sounds crazy. It is crazy. But if there's one thing that is true, it is this. My name is Tobias Lawrence Martin. On December 9th, 2015, I killed my psychologist named Mary Steele. I did it because I couldn't cope with the fact that I wasn't going to become a police officer. I've been on land for 4 years now, working odd jobs until I finally found a permanent one. I worked the late shift at the Majestic Movie Theater in Phoenix.